Hello there. Now we know a Labour government would hold a second EU referendum, but a new report out today says that a hung parliament will probably also lead to a second EU referendum. The Constitutional Unit at the University College London has produced a new report that builds on one they published last year. The report is called The Mechanics of a Further Referendum on Brexit Revisited – Questions for the New Parliament. And it looks at the likely scenarios that would force a second referendum and how it would work. But as it makes absolutely clear, this all hinges on the general election result itself. Now, a second referendum would be the most likely result in two scenarios, says the report. The first is where the Labour Party gets a majority and fulfils its manifesto promises. The second is where the Tories end up with a minority government or a very slim and unstable majority. Now, the first of those is not a realistic possibility at present, but with 11 days to go to the general election, then the second, a hung parliament, is something we should all be wary of. I will also take the opportunity to point out here that the report says that the minimum time required to organise and run a referendum would be 22 weeks. That means that Jeremy Corbyn's promise of renegotiating the Withdrawal Agreement treaty in 3 months, while preparing in tandem to hold a referendum on that treaty within 6 months or 26 weeks of getting into power, would be quite a tall order to meet. And there is also another factor, that of the EU agreeing to another Article 50 extension for at least, say, 6 months for that referendum to take place. In the past, this has been agreed without too much difficulty, but there is a whole new EU Commission and Parliament and new presidents all round, so who knows? So a hung Parliament would be extremely keen to get that extension organised as quickly as possible. But I think it may have a couple of other issues to overcome too. There is also one really important central point as well, which I'll come on to in a bit. Now, the first of these issues MPs will have to resolve is the time it takes to organise themselves into a new government. After the 2010 general election, which resulted in the Tory Lib Dem coalition, it took 5 to 6 days to sort it all out. If this were replicated now, we wouldn't have any form of real government until at least the 23rd of December. And if it's a Labour SNP affair, it might well take longer, unless they've already sorted out a deal, of course. And if this came about, a true Brexit would be lost and the UK economy would be toast anyway, with two massively divisive referendums facing us too. On the other hand, Boris might just have the numbers to keep his keys to number 10, or the opposition might not be able to agree terms between themselves. And in that case, because he has already been stymied by Parliament once or twice before, I would expect that Boris and his team would have something planned for this type of hung Parliament scenario. And should a Boris-led minority government occur, you will see the Remain side quickly lawyering up and getting the Court of Sessions in Edinburgh ready to rock and roll, while all the usual suspects crawl out of the woodwork to stick their oars in. And this would more than likely include some of the names that have found themselves very recently out in the cold electorally. The likes of maybe Dominic Grieve and Ken Clarke spring readily to mind. Parliament itself will be reconvening on Tuesday the 17th of December in accordance with the royal proclamation issued when Parliament was dissolved for this general election. And with a majority, Boris will probably crack on with things as planned so as to get his Withdrawal Agreement treaty through and ratified before January the 31st. But with a minority government, Boris may well decide to slow things right down on the basis that he will have to rethink everything. and Boris will then presumably be gearing up to use a potential no-deal Brexit as leverage against the opposition. Remember that the default position is still that we leave the EU without a deal on the 31st of January. A bit of déjà vu all over again. But there is a huge difference this time, and that is the occupant of the Speaker's chair. In the last Parliament, the previous Speaker, John Bercow, could be relied upon to interpret the House of Commons rules to change a pure debating motion into a route to full primary Brexit blocking legislation, while ignoring some of the procedural niceties along the way. But as I understand it, the new Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has said that he won't be going in for that type of thing. So, if a minority government was to sit on its hands, with the clock running down to no deal, so offering no primary legislation that could be amended into an Article 50 extension or a second EU referendum, then I think a Remain-minded Parliament would only have two choices open to it, or face a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of January. One choice would be a vote of no confidence in the Boris Johnson government, and the other would be to have yet another election. And both options would be problematic. Without forcing an Article 50 extension, which would be difficult post-Bercow, a general election would just result in a no-deal Brexit. And although a motion of no confidence could be tabled by any MP, the government only has to move it if the leader of the opposition calls for it. And we're back to the same situation as before, with MPs potentially shying away because they don't trust Corbyn, and Corbyn holding back, knowing he hasn't got enough support. More déjà vu all over again. And if they do end up voting against Boris, they've only got 14 days to agree on a new leader before a general election is automatically triggered, once again leading to a default no-deal Brexit. And there is legal opinion out there that Boris could just hang on for those 14 days anyway while attempting to regain the confidence of MPs, so forcing another election. Cue more Gina Miller, more Joe Lyon-Moam, more Court of Sessions and more Supreme Court. But this assumes that with a hung Parliament, Boris Johnson keeps ploughing on with no-deal Brexit planning and, most importantly, is prepared to leave the EU with or without a deal on the 31st of January, and no one appears to be asking him about that. What I'm saying is that I don't think a hung Parliament would automatically lead to a second EU referendum. A second EU referendum would only happen if either it was Corbyn-led or if Boris allowed it to happen in preference to a no-deal Brexit. Now to that one big central issue I talked about earlier. The withdrawal agreement is not a deal, and this is absolutely crucial. I'll repeat it. The withdrawal agreement is not a deal. Remember that under Article 50 we can't discuss a deal until after we've actually withdrawn from the European Union. That's what the transition period is all about, agreeing the deal. The deal itself comes after we've left the EU and will be based either loosely or closely or maybe not at all on the political declaration. And I stress this because how can you have a referendum on either remaining in the EU or being part of a deal with it that does not yet exist? And Labour says it will extend the Article 50 process to get a new deal. But they can't. They won't. All they can get is another withdrawal agreement, but with no actual agreed deal, just an amended political declaration. So having a referendum on that is also a nonsense, because there would be no actual deal to have a referendum on. The truth is that a proper referendum on any substantive deal struck with the EU would have to take place after we've actually left the bloc in law. but before we sign up to the new deal when it's eventually been negotiated during the transition phase. And the referendum question would have to then be between the newly negotiated deal and rejoining the European Union, together with being part of the Eurozone and the Schengen area, just for starters. It would be a farce to have a referendum on a deal that we have not even started to negotiate. So anyone claiming that it would be the deal against Remain is seriously misleading you. It would be Remain versus an unknown and non-legal quantity, so I would argue it would be legally invalid to even consider holding a referendum on that basis. If there is no negotiated deal yet, then they can't show it to us, so we can't vote on it, full stop. We need to stop this second EU referendum nonsense right now. Anyway, what do you think? Please share and comment, and thank you for watching. Please do like and share this video, and also subscribe to my channel. And when subscribing, please do remember to press on the little bell next to the subscribe button. That way you'll get an alert every single time I put up a new video. And thank you very much for watching.